The void of space held no comfort for Rayhan as her ship hurtled through the debris field. The mission was simple: infiltrate the human outpost on Series 7, destroy their defensive systems, and retreat before reinforcements arrived. As the Empire's most decorated warrior, bearing the title Blade of the Empire, failure was not an option. Rayhan's slender fingers tightened around the controls of her stealth craft. The blue-tinged skin across her knuckles stretched taut with tension. Unlike most Zethri warriors who relied heavily on technology, she preferred the intimacy of close combat. The vibroblade strapped to her thigh was proof of that philosophy, a philosophy that had earned her respect among the Empire's military elite. Approaching target zone, atmospheric entry in 30 seconds, the ship's AI announced. Rayhan's four-pupiled eyes narrowed as she studied the human outpost schematics one final time. The structure seemed unremarkable, a standard human alliance design with predictable weaknesses. The defense grid was their pride, a complex network of energy cannons and shield generators that had repelled 3 previous Zethri assaults. Those failures brought shame to the Empire, she whispered to herself. I will not repeat their mistakes. The craft shuddered as it penetrated the thin atmosphere of Series 7. Rayhan activated her stealth protocols and began her descent toward the outpost. Intelligence had identified a blind spot in the human sensors, a flaw she intended to exploit. As her ship approached the landing zone, Rayhan felt the first tremor of unease. The outpost appeared different from the intelligence briefings. New structures had been erected, and the defense grid seemed upgraded. Impossible, she hissed, recalibrating her sensors. The information is barely a lunar cycle old. The warning came too late. A brilliant beam of energy sliced through her ship's port wing. Alarms blared as the craft spiraled toward the rocky surface below. Stealth systems compromised, the AI warned dispassionately. Defense grid has locked onto our position. Rayhan's training took over. She abandoned the damaged craft, ejecting moments before it crashed. The impact sent tremors through the ground as she rolled to absorb the landing shock. Her combat suit automatically adjusted to the planet's atmosphere and gravity, allowing her to sprint toward the outpost perimeter. Commander Rayhan, we're detecting increased activity at the human outpost, came a voice through her comm. Support teams standing by for extraction. Negative. I can still complete the mission, Rayhan replied, her voice steady despite the circumstances. She would not call for help. Not yet. To do so would be to admit weakness. The perimeter wall loomed ahead, its surface gleaming with energy barriers. Rayhan unsheathed her vibroblade and activated her armor's stealth field. The humans would never see her coming, or so she thought. The first volley of plasma fire nearly took her head off. Rayhan ducked, rolling behind a rock formation as more shots peppered the ground around her. Intruder detected. Security teams to the eastern perimeter, a human voice shouted through an amplification system. Rayhan cursed. Her stealth technology should have concealed her presence. The humans must have upgraded their detection systems as well. She had 2 choices: retreat and face the Empire's disappointment, or push forward and likely die in the attempt. For a Zethri warrior, the choice was clear. With a battle cry that sent chills through the human defenders, Rayhan charged the perimeter wall. Her blade sliced through the first 2 guards before they could react. The third managed to fire his weapon, grazing her shoulder. She hardly felt the wound, adrenaline pushing her forward as she breached the outer defenses. Inside the compound, chaos erupted. Alarms blared as human soldiers scrambled to contain the threat. Rayhan moved like a phantom through their ranks, her target clear, the central control hub where she could disable their defenses. But as she approached the hub, reality set in. The security was far heavier than reported. At least 20 elite Human Alliance soldiers guarded the entrance, equipped with Zethri detection technology. This is impossible, she breathed, realizing she had been set up. The intelligence was faulty, deliberately so, perhaps. Her comm crackled to life. Commander, we've detected a massive energy surge at your location. The humans are powering up something big. Rayhan glanced at her tactical display and felt cold dread wash over her. The outpost wasn't just a defensive position. It was housing something far more dangerous. Something that could threaten the entire Zethary fleet positioned at the edge of the system. Support team, retreat immediately, she ordered. They're preparing to. Too late. In her haste to warn her team, she had accidentally transmitted on an unsecured channel. The humans had intercepted her. Signal. The Zethary fleet's position has been confirmed, a human officer announced triumphantly. Fira solution located. Rayhan watched in horror as massive cannons emerged from hidden silos around the outpost. They weren't defensive weapons. They were long-range artillery capable of striking her support fleet. She had one chance to stop this. Abandoning all caution, Rayhan sprinted toward the nearest cannon, determined to sabotage it before it could fire. Human soldiers opened fire, forcing her to weave between cover. A blast caught her leg, sending her sprawling. Through gritted teeth, she pushed herself up, limping toward her target. Another shot hit her squarely in the back, her armor absorbing most of the impact but the force knocking her down again. As she struggled to rise, she noticed a group of human engineers working frantically near one of the power conduits. They were civilians, technicians, not soldiers. As she watched, the conduit began to spark dangerously. Instinct took over. Rayhan changed course, sprinting toward the engineers despite her injuries. "Get back," she shouted in the human language, surprising even herself. The conduit exploded just as she reached them. Rayhan threw herself over the nearest humans, her armor taking the brunt of the blast. The world went white with pain, then dark. Her last conscious thought was of the shame she would bring to the Empire. She had failed her mission, and worse, she had been captured alive, the ultimate disgrace for a Zethary warrior. When consciousness returned, it came in painful fragments. The sterile smell of a medical facility. The soft beep of monitoring equipment. The cold bite of restraints around her wrists and ankles. Rayhan opened her eyes to find herself in a brightly lit cell. The walls were a pristine white, unmarked except for a reflective panel that was undoubtedly an observation window. Her wounds had been treated, her armor removed and replaced with a simple gray jumpsuit. Captured. The word burned like acid in her mind. No Zethary warrior had ever returned from human captivity, not because humans executed their prisoners, but because Zethary chose death over the dishonor of capture. She should have activated her termination implant before losing consciousness. The door to her cell slid open, revealing a human female in a military uniform adorned with rank insignia. She was tall for a human, with short-cropped hair and eyes that had seen too much conflict. "I am Captain Elaine Morgan," the human announced, her voice clipped and professional. "Commander of this facility." Rayhan remained silent, glaring at her captor with undisguised contempt. "You've been unconscious for 3 days," Morgan continued, unmoved by the Zethary's hostility. "Your wounds required significant treatment. Why keep me alive?" Rayhan finally asked, her voice raspy from disuse. Morgan's expression hardened slightly. "That's what civilized species do with prisoners of war. Though I'm not sure your people would understand that concept." The barb struck home, but Rayhan maintained her composure. "The Empire does not take prisoners. It is more merciful to grant an honorable death in combat." "Is that what happened to the 307th Battalion? An honorable death?" Morgan's voice carried an undercurrent of tightly controlled rage. "They surrendered according to interstellar conventions. Your people executed them anyway." Rayhan blinked, genuinely confused. "The 307th? I know of no such incident." "Of course you don't," Morgan replied bitterly. "Just following orders, right?" Before Rayhan could respond, another human entered the cell. This one wore no uniform, instead dressed in a white lab coat over casual clothing. His demeanor was entirely different from the captain's, curious rather than confrontational. "Captain, our patient is awake." "Excellent." The newcomer approached Rayhan with undisguised fascination. "I'm Dr. Gavin Sue, xenobiology specialist. How are you feeling?" The casual question caught Rayhan off guard. I am a prisoner awaiting interrogation or execution. How I feel is irrelevant. Dr. Sue smiled slightly. On the contrary, your physiological state is highly relevant to my research. The Zethary metabolism is fascinating. You processed our standard antibiotics at 3 times the human rate. Doctor, Morgan interrupted, she's a prisoner, not a research subject. She's both, Sue replied cheerfully, checking readings on a nearby monitor. And a remarkable specimen at that. The way her wounds are healing. Enough, Morgan cut him off. We need information, not a scientific paper. Rayhan observed their interaction with growing confusion. This was not how prisoners were treated in the Empire. There would be no casual conversation, no medical care beyond what was necessary to keep the subject alive for questioning. What do you want from me? She finally asked. Morgan turned her attention back to Rayhan. Information about Zethary fleet. Movements, weapons capabilities, and command structure. In exchange, we offer fair treatment under the Galactic Convention on Prisoners of War. I will tell you nothing, Rayhan replied automatically. That's what they all say at first, Morgan said with a shrug. We're not barbarians. We don't use torture or truth serums. You'll be treated humanely regardless of your cooperation. This confused Rayhan even more. Then what leverage do you have? Morgan's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Time, Commander. You have nothing but time to reconsider your position. With that, Morgan turned to leave. Dr. Sue lingered a moment longer, adjusting something on Rayhan's medical monitor. The captain lost her entire unit to a Zethary ambush 2 years ago, he said quietly. The fact that you're alive at all is significant. As the doors sealed behind them, Rayhan was left alone with her thoughts. The human doctor's words echoed in her mind. Why they spared her? Why treat her wounds? The Empire would have extracted whatever information they could before disposing of a captured enemy. Days passed in a monotonous cycle of medical checks, bland meals, and periodic questioning sessions that Rayhan steadfastly refused to cooperate with. Captain Morgan attended most of these sessions, her cold eyes never revealing anything but professional detachment. Dr. Sue was a more frequent visitor, seemingly more interested in Rayhan's biology than any military intelligence she might possess. His questions were about Zethary, physiology, culture, and history rather than weapons or tactics. Against her better judgment, Rayhan found herself answering some of these questions. They seemed harmless enough, and the doctor's genuine interest was novel. No one in the Empire had ever asked her opinion on Zethary art or literature. Your people have a remarkable artistic tradition, Dr. Sue commented one day as he checked her vital signs. The crystalline sculptures from the 3rd Dynasty are particularly stunning. You've seen Zethary art? Rayhan asked, surprised. There was an exhibition on neutral territory. Before the war intensified, he explained. I attended as part of a cultural exchange program. Rayhan shook her head in disbelief. The Empire would never allow our treasures to be displayed for aliens. Dr. Sue looked up from his tablet. It wasn't the Empire that organized it. It was a group of Zethary artists who fled during the military coup 80 years ago. Lies, Rayhan hissed, though a seed of doubt had been planted. There were gaps in the Empire's official history, periods referred to only as times of transition. Their conversation was interrupted by an alarm blaring throughout the facility. Dr. Sue glanced at his communication device and paled. What is it? Rayhan demanded. A Zethary destroyer has entered orbit, he replied, backing toward the door. They're demanding your return. Rayhan felt a surge of conflicting emotions, pride that the Empire would send a destroyer for her, but also fear. She knew what awaited her if she returned, a trial for failure, with only one possible verdict. Hours later, Captain Morgan entered her cell. The human's face was grim. Your people have made contact, she said without preamble. They're demanding your extradition to face charges of treason and failure in combat. Rayhan's heart sank, though she maintained her stoic expression. And you will comply? Not necessarily, Morgan replied, studying Rayhan carefully. The Zethary commander made it clear what awaits you, a public execution. Is that accurate? Rayhan nodded once. It is our way. Failure is not tolerated. especially among the warrior caste. Even though your failure saved the lives of 5 human engineers. Morgan asked quietly. Rayhan looked up sharply. What are you talking about? The power conduit explosion. Our security footage shows you changing course to shield those technicians. Morgan crossed her arms. Why did you do that? Rayhan looked away. They were non-combatants. It was instinct. An instinct that contradicts everything we're taught about Zethri warriors, Morgan noted. The official line is that your kind view all humans as vermin to be exterminated. Not exterminated, Rayhan corrected automatically. Subjugated for your own good. Your species lacks discipline and unity. Morgan actually laughed at that. Says the prisoner who disobeyed orders to save enemy civilians. Before Rayhan could form a retort, Morgan's communication device chimed. Her expression darkened as she read the message. The destroyer is threatening to open fire if we don't surrender you within 24 hours, she informed Rayhan. Apparently, your emperor takes your failure very personally. The emperor, Rayhan whispered, genuine fear crossing her features for the first time. He would sacrifice a destroyer and its crew just to make an example of me. So it seems, Morgan replied, watching Rayhan's reaction closely. Is that the unity and discipline your empire prides itself on? Rayhan had no answer. The thought of hundreds of her fellow Zethri dying just to ensure her execution seemed wasteful, dishonorable even, but such thoughts were dangerously close to treason themselves. I must be returned, she finally said. It is my duty to face the consequences of my failure. Morgan studied her for a long moment. Even if those consequences are unjust. Justice is not relevant, Rayhan replied. Only order and the strength of the empire. We'll see, Morgan said cryptically as she left the cell. The diplomatic meeting was arranged on a neutral space station position between the human outpost and the Zethri destroyer. Captain Morgan had insisted that Rayhan be present, though the Zethri representatives had argued against it. The meeting room was sparse, dominated by a long table with the human delegation on one side and 3 Zethri officials on the other. Rayhan stood slightly behind Captain Morgan, her wrists bound by energy restraints. The terms are simple, the lead Zethri representative, Administrator Vorex, stated coldly. Surrender the prisoner Rayhan, formerly commander of the Imperial 6th Assault Division, to face justice for her failures and violations of Imperial military code. The human diplomat, a silver-haired woman named Ambassador Chun, smiled thinly. And what exactly would this justice entail? That is an internal matter of the Zethri Empire, Vorex replied dismissively. The prisoner's fate is not subject to negotiation. Actually, it is, Morgan interjected, earning a sharp look from Ambassador Chun. Under Galactic Convention, we have the right to ensure humane treatment of any prisoner we transfer to another authority. Administrator Vorex's facial membranes fluttered in what Rayhan recognized as irritation. The Zethri Empire is not signatory to your Galactic Convention. Then we have no obligation to return Commander Rayhan. Ambassador Chen stated smoothly. If you wish to operate outside established interstellar law, you forfeit its protections as well. The tension in the room was palpable. Rayhan kept her gaze fixed on the floor, careful not to make eye contact with her former superiors. To do so without permission would be yet another violation of protocol. Perhaps, the human ambassador continued, we could discuss alternatives that would satisfy both parties. There are no alternatives, Vorex snapped. The criminal must face imperial justice. Captain Morgan stepped forward, her posture rigid. Before we proceed, I'd like to submit testimony regarding the prisoner's conduct during the engagement at Series 7. Vorex's membranes narrowed. Such testimony is irrelevant. Not to us, Ambassador Chen replied firmly. Captain, please proceed. Morgan activated a holographic display at the center of the table. During the attack on our outpost, Commander Rayhan had a clear path to our central control hub. Instead, she diverted her assault to save 5 civilian engineers from a power conduit explosion. The recording played, showing Rayhan's actions clearly. The Zethri officials watched impassively. She exhibited honor on the battlefield. Morgan continued. And under Section 47 of the Galactic Convention, this entitles her to special consideration. Your human concepts of honor are meaningless, Vorex dismissed. She failed at her mission and allowed herself to be captured. The penalty is death. Rayhan felt something shift inside her at these words. The cold declaration, the dismissal of her attempt to save non-combatants, it suddenly seemed wrong. If I may speak, she said quietly, breaking protocol. All eyes turned to her in surprise. Administrator Vorex's face contorted with rage. You have not been given permission to address this council. Criminal. Let her speak, Ambassador Chen insisted. Rayhan raised her head, meeting Vorex's gaze directly. Another violation. I accept that I failed in my mission and deserve punishment under Imperial law. But I question whether the Empire's interests are truly served by executing a commander with 15 years of combat experience for a single failure. The room fell silent. Such defiance was unheard of from a Zethri facing judgment. This proves she has been corrupted by human influence, one of the other Zethri officials declared. The penalty must be carried out immediately. Ambassador, Chun held up a hand. We propose a compromise. Commander Rayhan remains in human custody under a special diplomatic arrangement. She will not be interrogated for military intelligence, but neither will she be surrendered for execution. Unacceptable. Vorex slammed a six-fingered hand on the table. If you do not comply with our demands, the destroyer in orbit will open fire on your outpost. An act of war over a single prisoner. Ambassador, Chen raised an eyebrow. Is one execution worth breaking the current ceasefire? The exchange continued, growing increasingly heated. Rayhan found herself watching Captain Morgan, who remained composed despite the threats being leveled against her facility and people. Finally, a tentative agreement was reached. Rayhan would remain in human custody for a cooling-off period of 30 days, after which negotiations would resume. The Zethri destroyer would withdraw to the edge of the system, but maintain communication. As they were escorted back to the transport that would return them to the outpost, Rayhan found herself walking alongside Captain Morgan. Why did you defend me? She asked quietly. Morgan's expression remained neutral. Because executing prisoners for failure is barbaric. And because you saved my people, whether you meant to or not. The Empire will not forget this defiance, Rayhan warned. You've made yourself a target. Morgan's mouth quirked in a half-smile. I've been a target since the day I put on this uniform, Commander. At least this time, it's for something I believe in. Rayhan had no response to that. The concept of defying authority for personal belief was alien to her Zethri upbringing. Yet something about it resonated deep within her. The 30-day reprieve was barely a week old when disaster struck. An emergency alarm blared throughout the facility, dragging Rayhan from a restless sleep. Her cell door slid open, revealing Captain Morgan in full combat gear. On your feet, Commander. We've got a situation. What's happening? Rayhan asked as Morgan deactivated her restraints. We're under attack, but not from your people. Morgan handed Rayhan a datapad showing tactical displays. These ships don't match any known Zethri or Human Alliance design. Rayhan studied the imagery with growing concern. Harvester vessels. The Krell Collective. You know them? Everyone in this sector knows the Krell, Rayhan replied grimly. They're nomadic raiders who strip planets and stations of resources, including organic components. Morgan's expression darkened. You mean they take people as slaves, food, or worse? Rayhan confirmed. They're attacking your outpost and the Zethri destroyer simultaneously. They always target both sides of a conflict, picking off the weakened opponents. Morgan seemed to come to a decision. We need your help. You know more about these Krell than we do. You're asking me to fight alongside you? Against an enemy of the Empire? Rayhan couldn't hide her surprise. I'm asking you to help us all survive, Morgan replied bluntly. Your people included. The tactical center of the outpost was a hive of frantic activity. Officers called out reports as displays showed the approach of a dozen Krell vessels. On another screen, the Zethri destroyer was already engaged in combat, its shields flaring under heavy fire. Status report, Morgan demanded as she entered, Rayhan close behind her. Krell forces have disabled the destroyer's main engines, a young officer reported. They've also launched smaller craft headed for our perimeter. Boarding parties, Rayhan interjected. The Krell will try to breach at multiple points simultaneously. The human officers stared at her with a mixture of surprise and suspicion. Morgan nodded for her to continue. Their boarding craft have a weakness, Rayhan explained, stepping forward to indicate points on the tactical display. The ventral thrusters are exposed during final approach. A targeted strike here could disable them before they dock. Morgan turned to her weapons officer. Recalibrate defense turrets to target those points. And give me a direct channel to the Zethri destroyer. Sir, the communications officer questioned, clearly confused. Do it, Morgan ordered. We need to coordinate if either of us is going to survive this. Within minutes, a grim-faced Zethri captain appeared on the main view screen. His expression darkened further when he spotted Rayhan standing beside Captain Morgan. This is Captain Krex of the Imperial Destroyer Relentless, he declared coldly. State your purpose, human. Captain Krex, I'm proposing a temporary alliance against the Krell forces, Morgan replied without preamble. Your ship is damaged, and our ground defenses are designed for sustained sieges, not repelling boarding parties. The Zethri captain's facial membranes twitched. You expect me to trust humans? I expect you to recognize a mutual threat, Morgan countered. Commander Rayhan has provided tactical information about Krell weaknesses that could benefit us both. Krex's gaze shifted to Rayhan. The traitor speaks for our enemies now. The commander speaks to save Zethri lives, Rayhan replied, straightening her posture to attention. As is her duty, Captain. A tense silence followed before Krex nodded reluctantly. What do you propose? The plan came together quickly. The destroyer would focus its remaining weapons on the larger Krell vessels while the human outpost defenses targeted the boarding craft. A mixed team of human soldiers and Zethri crew from the destroyer would defend critical infrastructure on the ground. Rayhan found herself equipped with a standard-issue human alliance combat suit and weapons. The armor felt strange after years of wearing Zethri military gear, but she adapted quickly. Try not to shoot any of my people, Morgan said as she handed Rayhan a plasma rifle. I could say the same to you, Rayhan replied, checking the weapon's charge. Morgan almost smiled. Fair enough. You'll be with my squad. We're defending the main power core. If the Krell disable it, we lose life support throughout the facility. The first Krell boarding craft breached the perimeter 30 minutes later. The creatures that emerged were nightmarish, tall, insectoid forms with multiple limbs and chitinous armor. They moved with unnatural speed, their mandibles clicking as they communicated in their incomprehensible language. Rayhan and Morgan's squad engaged them in one of the main corridors leading to the power core. The Krell warriors were formidable, shrugging off shots that would have dropped a human or Zethri instantly. Aim for the joints in their exoskeletons. Rayhan called out, demonstrating by dropping a Krell with a precisely placed shot to its neck joint. Their armor is weakest there. The humans adjusted their tactics accordingly, their effectiveness improving immediately. Morgan fought alongside Rayhan, the two of them falling into a natural rhythm. Morgan providing covering fire while Rayhan advanced, then vice versa. During a brief lull in the fighting, Morgan glanced at Rayhan. You're pretty good with our weapons for someone who's never used them before. Combat principles are universal, Rayhan replied, reloading her rifle. And your plasma rifles are similar to our older models. A scream echoed from further down the corridor. A human soldier was being dragged away by a Krell warrior, its mandibles poised to deliver a paralyzing bite. Without hesitation, Rayhan sprinted forward, firing precisely at the creature's vulnerable points. The Krell collapsed, its limbs twitching as it died. The soldier stared up at Rayhan in shock as she helped him to his feet. Thanks, he managed, clearly surprised to be saved by a Zethri. Rayhan nodded curtly and returned to Morgan's position. The captain gave her an appraising look, but said nothing. The battle raged for hours. Human and Zethri forces once bitter enemies, now fought side by side against a common threat. Reports from across the facility indicated that the cooperative tactics were working. The Krell were being repelled. In orbit, the Zethri destroyer had managed to cripple two of the larger Krell vessels with the tactical advice provided by the human weapons specialists. The tide was turning. Then disaster struck. A group of Krell warriors breached the secondary command center, capturing several high-ranking human officers and Zethri representatives who had been coordinating the defense. Among them was Dr. Sue. They're heading for their extraction point in Sector 7. The tactical officer reported grimly. If they get those hostages off-planet. They won't, Morgan declared, checking her weapon. I'm taking a squad to intercept them. I'm coming with you, Rayhan stated firmly. Morgan hesitated only briefly before nodding. Let's move. They intercepted the Krell extraction team in a large hangar bay. The insectoid warriors had their prisoners bound and were loading them onto a transport. Dr. Sue appeared injured, his lab coat stained with blood. We need a distraction, Morgan whispered as they assessed the situation from cover. Something to draw their attention while we flank them. Rayhan studied the hangar layout. Those fuel cells. If we detonate one in the far end of the bay, it would create enough chaos for us to move in. Morgan nodded and dispatched 2 soldiers to plant the explosive. Minutes later, a massive explosion rocked the hangar. As predicted, most of the Krell guards rushed toward the source of the blast. Morgan's team attacked from multiple angles, catching the remaining Krell by surprise. Rayhan found herself facing 3 warriors protecting the prisoners. She engaged them directly, her combat training evident in every precise movement. One of the Krell lunged at her with a serrated blade. Rayhan dodged, but not quickly enough. The blade sliced through her armor, drawing blue blood from her side. She staggered but continued fighting, taking down one warrior after another. By the time she reached the prisoners, Morgan had cleared the other side of the hangar. The captain had sustained injuries as well, a nasty gash across her forehead, leaving blood streaming down her face. Dr. Sue. Rayhan knelt beside the injured scientist, breaking his restraints. Can you walk? I think so, he replied weakly. You're working together. Necessity makes for strange alliances, Morgan commented as she freed the other prisoners. A warning klaxon sounded throughout the hangar. The facility's AI announced, Warning, Krell reinforcements detected approaching Hangar Bay 7. Estimated arrival, 2 minutes. We need to move, Morgan ordered. Back to the defensive perimeter. As they hurried the freed hostages toward safety, Rayhan noticed a Krell warrior that had been playing dead suddenly rise behind Captain Morgan, its stinger poised to strike. Behind you, Rayhan shouted, throwing herself forward. The stinger meant for Morgan plunged into Rayhan's shoulder instead. Searing pain spread through her body as the Krell's neurotoxin entered her bloodstream. With her remaining strength, she drove her combat knife into the creature's eye socket, killing it instantly. Morgan spun around just in time to see Rayhan collapse. Medic, she shouted, dropping to her knees beside the fallen Zethri. Stay with me, Commander. Rayhan's vision blurred, the neurotoxin rapidly shutting down her nervous system. Captain, she managed to whisper, tell my people, I died with honor. Morgan's face hardened with determination. Tell them yourself, she growled, injecting Rayhan with an emergency antitoxin. You're not dying on my watch. The battle for the outpost ended 12 hours later with the retreat of the remaining Krell forces. The combined human and Zethri defenses had proven too formidable, sending a clear message. This prey would not be taken easily. Rayhan awoke in the medical bay 3 days after collapsing in the hangar. Her body felt leaden, the after effects of the Krell toxin still lingering in her system. To her surprise, Captain Morgan was seated beside her bed, reading reports on a datapad. You're still alive, Morgan observed without looking up. Dr. Sue said you would be. Something about Zethri resilience to neurotoxins. Rayhan tried to sit up but found herself too weak. The battle. We won, Morgan replied, finally meeting Rayhan's gaze. Your tactical knowledge of the Krell saved a lot of lives, human and Zethri. A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, but weighted with unspoken questions. "Why did you take that stinger for me?" Morgan finally asked. "We were enemies a week ago." Rayhan considered the question carefully. In that moment, we weren't enemies. We were warriors facing a common threat. "Is that all?" Rayhan looked away. "No. You treated me with respect, even when you had reason to hate me and my kind. That is rare." Morgan nodded slowly. "The Zethri officials who survived the attack have requested a formal meeting. Apparently, your actions have caused quite a stir in the Imperial ranks." Rayhan felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. "They still intend to execute me." "That's what we're going to discuss," Morgan said, standing. "The meeting's in an hour. Think you can walk by then?" With Dr. Su's help, Rayhan managed to attend the meeting, though she required a mobility aid to remain standing. The conference room was smaller this time, with just Captain Morgan and Ambassador Chun representing the humans, while a single high-ranking Zethri official named Supreme Commander Zeril represented the Empire. "Commander Rayhan," Zeril began, his tone neutral rather than condemning. "Your actions during the Krell assault have been noted by the Emperor himself." Rayhan kept her expression carefully controlled. "I merely performed my duty as a warrior of the Empire, Supreme Commander." "By saving human lives?" "By revealing tactical weaknesses of a common enemy to our adversaries." Zeril's tone was questioning rather than accusatory. "These are not traditional interpretations of duty. The Krell threatened both our peoples," Rayhan replied steadily. "Had either the human outpost or our destroyer fallen, the other would soon have followed. Unity was tactical." Zeril exchanged glances with the human representatives. "The Emperor has reviewed your case personally. The sentence of death for your failure at Series 7 has been reconsidered." Rayhan blinked in surprise. "Reconsidered, Supreme Commander?" "The defense of both human and Zethri forces against a superior Krell fleet has demonstrated the potential benefits of cooperation," Zeril continued, clearly choosing his words carefully. "The Emperor believes this revelation may be worth more than the traditional punishment for your earlier failure." Captain Morgan stepped forward. "We've proposed a new arrangement. Commander Rayhan would serve as a military liaison between our forces, helping to coordinate joint operations against the Krell and potentially other threats that endanger both our peoples." Rayhan struggled to maintain her composure. This was unprecedented in Imperial history. A warrior who had failed being offered redemption, and through cooperation with humans, no less. "The Emperor has agreed to a trial period," Zeril continued. 6 standard months, during which you will remain under joint custody, advising both human and Zethri forces on collaborative defense strategies. "And after these 6 months?" Rayhan asked cautiously. "That will depend on the success of this experiment," Zeril replied. "If the cooperation proves beneficial to the Empire's interests, your sentence will be permanently commuted. If not," he left the implication hanging. Ambassador Chun spoke for the first time. "We believe this arrangement benefits all parties. The recent Krell attack demonstrates that neither of our civilizations can afford to continue this war while a greater threat looms." Rayhan looked to Captain Morgan, whose expression remained neutral yet somehow encouraging. "I accept this assignment," Rayhan said finally, bowing her head to Zeril. "I will serve the Empire in this new capacity." "See that you do," Zeril replied, rising to his feet. "Remember, Commander, the eyes of the Emperor will be watching your every move." After the meeting concluded and Zeril departed, Rayhan found herself alone with Captain Morgan and Dr. Su in the medical bay. "That went better than expected," Dr. Su remarked, checking Rayhan's vital signs. "The neurotoxin is breaking down nicely. You should regain full mobility within a few days." Rayhan studied Morgan's face. "This was your idea, wasn't it? This liaison position?" Morgan shrugged slightly. It seemed like a waste to execute a skilled commander who had just proven the value of cooperation. "The Empire does not typically value cooperation over strength," Rayhan observed. "Maybe they're learning," Morgan replied. "Or maybe they just saw an opportunity to gather intelligence by keeping you in place." Rayhan hadn't considered that possibility. "You think I meant to spy on you?" I think the Empire rarely does anything without multiple layers of motivation, Morgan said pragmatically. Just as I'm sure your ambassador, Chun, expects me to keep an eye on you for our benefit. Then why advocate for this arrangement at all? Morgan was silent for a moment. Because I watched you take a Krell stinger meant for me. Because you saved Dr. Sue and the other hostages. And because maybe, just maybe, if we can work together against the Krell, we might eventually stop trying to obliterate each other. A naive hope, Rayhan commented, though without her usual conviction. Maybe, Morgan conceded, but it's better than the alternative. The days that followed brought a flurry of activity as the unique arrangement took shape. The medical bay was converted into temporary joint headquarters, with communication links to both the human command structure and the Zethary destroyer, which had been repaired enough to remain in stable orbit. Rayhan found herself in the strange position of briefing mixed teams of human and Zethary officers on Krell tactics and strategies for countering future incursions. The initial meetings were tense, centuries of propaganda and hatred not easily overcome. The Krell will return, Rayhan explained to one such mixed group, indicating points on a stellar map. They never abandon a target completely. They will observe, adapt, and attack again when they believe we are vulnerable. How can we trust this assessment? A Zethary officer named Krall demanded. She failed at her mission against the humans. Perhaps she fails in this analysis as well. Commander Rayhan's tactical assessment of the Krell during the battle was entirely accurate, Captain Morgan countered, entering the room. Her insights saved lives on both sides. With respect, Captain, a human lieutenant interjected, how do we know this isn't some elaborate Zethary plot? Get us to lower our defenses on certain vectors, only to be ambushed by Imperial forces instead of Krell. The distrust ran deep on both sides. Rayhan could feel the weight of suspicion each time she entered a room, the whispers that followed her through corridors. They think I'm either a traitor or a spy, she remarked to Dr. Sue during one of her medical checks. Can you blame them? He replied mildly. Your societies have been at war for generations. Trust requires time and consistent evidence. Time we may not have if the Krell return in force, Rayhan pointed out. Dr. Sue smiled enigmatically. Sometimes external pressure is exactly what's needed to forge unlikely alliances. That pressure came sooner than expected. 3 weeks into the joint operation, long-range sensors detected a Krell fleet gathering at the edge of the system, 3 times larger than the force they had previously repelled. An emergency meeting was called, with representatives from both factions gathering in the command center. Captain Morgan and the Zethary destroyer's commander, now in a temporary diplomatic ship, stood side by side as they reviewed the tactical displays. They've adapted their approach vectors to avoid our previous defensive positions, Morgan observed grimly. And they've brought specialized vessels designed to counter both our technologies, Commander Krex added, pointing to unusual configurations in the Krell fleet. Rayhan studied the displays intently. They're implementing a divided conquest strategy, she determined. These vessels will target human communications, while these will focus on Zethary shield generators. They mean to cripple us separately, then eliminate each faction while the other cannot assist. How can you be certain? Krall challenged. Because it's what I would do, Rayhan replied evenly. Exploit the existing division between enemies rather than face united opposition. The room fell silent as both humans and Zethary considered the implications. We need a unified defense, Morgan stated finally. Not coordination, unification. A single command structure directing both human and Zethary forces. The Zethary officers bristled visibly. The Empire does not subordinate its military to alien authority, Krex declared. Nor do we, Morgan countered. But we need to function as one force. I propose joint command, decisions requiring consensus between senior officers of both sides. An unwieldy system in combat conditions, Krall objected. Then what do you suggest? Morgan demanded. Because separately, we will fall. Rayhan had been quiet during this exchange, her mind racing through possibilities. Finally, she spoke. There is a precedent in Zethri military history, the Crisis Command Protocol. All Zethri eyes turned to her in shock. That protocol has not been invoked in 7 generations, Krex said slowly. What is this protocol? Morgan asked. During the hive mind incursion, when multiple Zethri worlds faced extinction, Rayhan explained, the Emperor temporarily granted command authority to specialized joint strike teams. Each team composed of officers from different imperial houses who normally competed for favor. These teams had autonomy to act without traditional chain of command, so long as they fulfilled their core mission. And you propose something similar here? Teams of humans and Zethri. Krex seemed skeptical, but not dismissive. Yes. Each critical defense sector would have a team with officers from both sides, empowered to make tactical decisions without consulting the full command structure. Overall strategy would remain with a joint council. Morgan nodded slowly. It could work. Small enough teams to make quick decisions, but with representation from both sides to ensure neither feels compromised. The Emperor would never approve such an arrangement, Krall protested. The Emperor approved my liaison position, Rayhan countered. And the Krell threat is real. Would you prefer to explain to His Imperial Majesty why you rejected a viable strategy and lost his destroyer as a result? The debate continued for hours, but eventually, necessity prevailed over tradition. The Crisis Command Protocol was adapted for joint human-Zethri implementation, with Rayhan and Captain Morgan heading the central coordination team. As preparations accelerated for the coming Krell assault, Rayhan found herself working closely with Morgan. They spent long hours revising defense plans, reallocating resources, and training the joint teams to work effectively together. Your Empire's military protocols are surprisingly adaptable, Morgan commented one night as they reviewed tactical simulations in the command center. The Empire endures because it evolves, Rayhan replied, though she couldn't help adding, even if that evolution is sometimes reluctant. Morgan almost smiled at that. I notice you still say the Empire rather than my empire. Significant. Rayhan paused, considering the observation. Perhaps. My perspective has shifted since my capture. Some certainties are less certain now. Such as the belief that humans are inherently chaotic and undisciplined, Rayhan admitted. Your defense of this outpost, your defense of me against my own people's judgment, demonstrated principles the Empire claims to value. Honor, loyalty, strategic thinking. High praise from the blade of the Empire, Morgan remarked. Rayhan shook her head slightly. That title was given to a warrior who saw only enemies to be defeated. I am no longer entirely that person. They were interrupted by an alert from the long-range sensors. The Krell fleet had accelerated. They would arrive within hours, not days as previously estimated. They sensed our preparations, Rayhan determined. They're moving before we can fully implement our defense strategy. Morgan immediately activated the command channel. All crisis teams, this is Morgan. Krell fleet approaching at high velocity. Accelerate deployment to Phase 2 positions. Repeat, accelerate to Phase 2. She turned to Rayhan. We're not ready. We never would be, Rayhan replied grimly. But we are more prepared than they expect. The Krell assault began with devastating precision. As Rayhan had predicted, they targeted communication arrays and shield generators specifically, attempting to isolate the human and Zethri forces from each other. What they hadn't anticipated was the integrated command structure. When human communications went down, Zethri systems relayed critical data. When Zethri shields faltered, human energy barriers extended to cover vulnerable areas. Rayhan and Morgan coordinated from the central command hub, dispatching crisis teams to critical pressure points as the battle unfolded. On the main view screen, they could see the Zethri destroyer engaging a cluster of Krell vessels that had been targeting the outpost's power grid. Crisis Team Delta reinforced the destroyer's port flank, Rayhan ordered, noting a weakness in the formation. Team Echo, prepare for boarding defense in Sector 7. Krell landing craft approaching. Morgan divided her attention between tactical displays and damage reports. Team Alpha reports Krell forces breaching the outer perimeter of Sector 3. Casualties reported. Redirect Team Gamma for support, Rayhan suggested. Their position is stabilized. Their collaborative command style had developed an almost intuitive quality over the past weeks. Where Morgan thought in terms of defensive positions and resource management, Rayhan focused on offensive tactics and anticipating enemy movements. Together, they formed a remarkably effective leadership unit. Hours into the battle, a critical alert sounded. A Krell command vessel had broken through the defensive line and was on approach to the outpost reactor core. If they disable the reactor, we lose everything, Morgan stated grimly. Shield protection, life support, weapons systems. Rayhan studied the tactical display. The access corridor to the reactor is too narrow for a full team. A small strike force might intercept them before they reach the core. Their eyes met in understanding. I'll lead it, Morgan declared. Not alone, Rayhan countered. I'm coming with you. Morgan looked as though she might argue, but time was critical. Lieutenant Park, you have command of the hub. Maintain coordination with the destroyer. Commander Rayhan and I are intercepting the Krell breach team. They moved quickly through the facility, gathering a small squad of both human and Zethri soldiers along the way. The sounds of battle echoed through the corridors. Weapons fire, impact tremors, the distinctive clicking communication of the Krell. As they approached the reactor section, they encountered the first signs of the Krell intrusion. Bodies of security personnel sprawled across blood-slicked floors, emergency barriers torn open by inhuman strength. They've evolved since our last encounter, Rayhan observed, noting modifications to the Krell they encountered, thicker armor plating over previously vulnerable joints, improved weapons. They adapt quickly, Morgan agreed, leading the squad deeper into the danger zone. The confrontation came at the final security checkpoint before the reactor core. A dozen Krell warriors were attempting to breach the reinforced door, while several more stood guard. Among them was a larger specimen, clearly a command unit, its exoskeleton adorned with trophies from previous conquests. We take out the leader first, Rayhan whispered. The subordinates will be disoriented momentarily. Morgan nodded, signaling their squad to take flanking positions. At her mark, they opened fire simultaneously, focusing their attack on the Krell commander. The element of surprise gave them a brief advantage, but the Krell recovered quickly. The battle became a desperate struggle in the confined space of the corridor, human and Zethri fighting side by side against the insectoid invaders. Rayhan found herself back-to-back with Morgan as they were surrounded by Krell warriors. They moved in near-perfect synchronization, each covering the other's blind spots, their complementary fighting styles creating an unexpectedly effective defense. Behind you, Morgan called, firing over Rayhan's shoulder to hit a Krell that had been about to strike. Rayhan spun and drove her blade into the creature's neck joint, then pulled Morgan down as another Krell fired a biological projectile over their heads. The Krell commander, wounded but still dangerous, suddenly lunged toward the reactor control panel, its claws reconfiguring into specialized tools designed to bypass security systems. It's trying to overload the core, Morgan shouted, breaking away to intercept the creature. The Krell commander swung one massive limb, catching Morgan in the chest and sending her crashing into a wall. Rayhan immediately moved to engage the creature, drawing its attention away from both Morgan and the controls. Your kind always underestimates unity, Rayhan snarled as she ducked under the creature's attack, slicing at its leg joints. The Krell responded with a series of clicking sounds that the universal translator rendered as, division is inevitable. Prey always turns on prey when resources dwindle. Not this time. Morgan's voice came from behind the creature as she rejoined the fight, blood streaming from a cut on her face but determination undiminished. Together, they coordinated their attacks on the Krell commander, forcing it away from the reactor controls. Their squad had managed to eliminate most of the other warriors, concentrating their fire to support Rayhan and Morgan's effort. The final moment came when Rayhan, seeing an opening, drove her blade deep into the commander's central neural cluster while Morgan fired repeatedly into its exposed sensory organs. The massive creature collapsed, its limbs twitching in death spasms. Reactor secure. Morgan reported breathlessly into her comm unit. Repeat, reactor secure. Status on other fronts. The news was unexpectedly positive. Without their command unit's coordination, the Krell forces had begun to fragment. The Zethary destroyer had disabled several key vessels, while the human defense grid had repelled most of the landing craft. Their retreating came the report from the command hub. Multiple Krell vessels disengaging and jumping to FTL. Rayhan leaned against a wall, suddenly aware of injuries she hadn't noticed during the fight. A deep gash in her arm, burns across her torso from Krell weapons fire. Morgan didn't look much better, her uniform torn and bloodied, but her eyes were alight with the realization of what they had accomplished. "We did it," she said simply. "We did," Rayhan agreed. Then, more significantly, together, the aftermath of the battle brought a surreal calm to the outpost. Repair crews worked alongside medical teams, addressing damage to both infrastructure and personnel. In orbit, the Zethary destroyer maintained position, its own crews conducting emergency repairs. 3 days after the Krell retreat, a formal meeting was convened in the outpost's main conference chamber. Representatives from the highest levels of both the Human Alliance and the Zethary Empire had arrived via fast transport, a clear indication of the significance attached to recent events. Rayhan, still bearing visible wounds from a battle, stood at attention as Imperial Archon Vitex, the Emperor's direct representative, entered the chamber. Beside her, Captain Morgan appeared equally formal in her dress uniform, though she too showed signs of recent combat. "Commander Rayhan," the Archon began without preamble, "your actions have been thoroughly reviewed by the Imperial Council." Rayhan maintained perfect composure, though internally she prepared herself for condemnation. Despite their victory, she had violated numerous Imperial protocols by integrating so completely with human command structures. The successful defense against a superior Krell force, achieved through implementation of the Crisis Command Protocol with the Archon paused almost imperceptibly. Non-Imperial forces represents an unprecedented tactical success. Rayhan remained silent, waiting for the judgment that would follow this assessment. Furthermore, the Archon continued, intelligence suggests the Krell have withdrawn entirely from this sector, a retreat not seen in recorded encounters with their kind. This outcome could not have been achieved by either human or Zethary forces acting independently. The Human Alliance representative, a stern-faced admiral named Takahashi, nodded in agreement. Our analysis concurs. The joint command structure proved remarkably effective, particularly the coordination between Commander Rayhan and Captain Morgan. The Archon turned his full attention to Rayhan. In light of these results, the Emperor has rescinded your death sentence permanently. Moreover, he has created a new position within the Imperial hierarchy, Liaison Commander of Joint Operations. Rayhan couldn't conceal her shock. Archon, I am honored by the Emperor's mercy. This is not merely mercy, Commander. It is recognition of effective strategy, regardless of its unconventional nature. The Archon's expression remained severe, but there was something like reluctant respect in his eyes. You will continue to serve as the primary military liaison between our forces, with the authority to implement joint training and defense protocols. Admiral Takahashi stepped forward. The Human Alliance has agreed to this arrangement. Captain Morgan will serve as your counterpart on our side, with equivalent authority. Rayhan glanced at Morgan, whose expression revealed nothing of her thoughts on this development. There are, of course, limitations, the Archon added. This cooperation extends only to matters concerning external threats, such as the Krell. The broader conflict between our peoples remains unresolved. A first step, nonetheless, Admiral Takahashi remarked. After the meeting concluded and the high-ranking officials departed to continue discussions in private, Rayhan found Morgan waiting in the corridor outside. Congratulations on your new position, Liaison Commander, Morgan said, a hint of irony in her tone. And to you, Rayhan replied, though I sense you are as surprised by this development as I am. Morgan shrugged slightly. Politics always follows success. Our collaborative defense gave both sides something they couldn't ignore, a victory neither could have achieved alone. Yet the Archon made it clear that the war continues, Rayhan observed. This cooperation is strictly limited to external threats. For now, Morgan said thoughtfully, but boundaries have a way of blurring over time. People who work together, who risk their lives for one another, they sometimes find it harder to remain enemies. Rayhan considered this. You believe this arrangement could lead to broader peace negotiations? I believe it's possible, Morgan replied carefully. More possible today than it was before you were captured. They walked together toward the observation deck, where repairs to the station's outer hull were visible through the reinforced viewport. Beyond the construction equipment, stars stretched into infinity, the same stars that had witnessed countless battles between their peoples. What happens now? Rayhan asked finally. Now we build something neither of us imagined before, Morgan answered. A framework for cooperation between species that have only known conflict. It won't be easy. There's too much history, too much pain on both sides. But not impossible, Rayhan found herself saying. Morgan almost smiled. No, not impossible. They stood in companionable silence, watching as a Zethary shuttle docked alongside human repair vessels. Once unthinkable, now a tentative reality. I once believed absolute loyalty to the Empire was the highest virtue, Rayhan said quietly. That failure deserved death, and mercy was weakness. And now, Rayhan turned to face her former enemy, now colleague. Now I understand that true strength sometimes requires questioning certainties. That loyalty to principles, justice, honor, cooperation, may sometimes transcend loyalty to systems. Dangerous thoughts for an imperial commander, Morgan observed. Perhaps, but necessary ones for a liaison commander, Rayhan replied. As they stood together at the threshold of an uncertain future, Rayhan reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from captured enemy sentenced to death to architect of an unprecedented alliance. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with political pitfalls and the weight of centuries of conflict. Yet for the first time since her capture, Rayhan felt something beyond duty or strategic necessity, something that might, in time, be called hope. Captain Morgan, she said formally, extending her hand in the human gesture of partnership she had come to understand. Morgan clasped it firmly. Commander Rayhan. Outside the viewport, the stars continued their eternal vigil, witnessing the first tentative step toward a different kind of future, one where ancient enemies might find common ground not through conquest, but through understanding.